What's up, guys? My name is Jake, and welcome to Abandoned, episode 69. Theme parks, specifically Disney, have perhaps some of the most famous iconography in the industry. Their Magic Kingdom parks being the most iconic, with their hub-and-spoke design with a main street leading to a castle. They're obviously very successful, and because of that, there have been several imitations. One of the most infamous being the Nara Dreamland Park in Osaka, Japan. But whenever the topic of abandoned theme park copies are brought up on the internet, Dreamland seems to always be picked, as some areas of the land were flooded after a particularly wet season. This was just one of the many problems that plagued the construction process, as the very land they were planning on building on was constantly in contention. Rangwood Group was buying parcels for a multi-million-dollar theme park from literal farmers. Once the local government got involved with the pricing of such land, however, no party would agree on the true value of their property. Now yes, this looming problem could have liked ride recession, particularly bad in the West. Their land troubles also continued to plague them, as it meant the park would no longer be the largest in Asia. Actually, those 120 acres had now shrunk to just 37 acres of usable land. The structures already built had pretty much fully occupied this now disproportional site, with the structures intended for a much bigger development around them, incorporating that their investment was intended for. So, the park was left properly abandoned while the developers figured out a better use for the land. This now meant a pretty massive, unfinished, Disney-style theme park was left to the elements. The way the park was constructed was rather strange. Some buildings were nearly finished with their facades and theming in place, while others 20 feet away were either just frames or literally. Within, the spaces seem to have been divided up into small shops and restaurants, with the larger areas inside possibly intended to serve as a show building for a dark ride. Despite the rather clean spaces inside, there was no mistaking the lack of care in its current state. The facades had clearly been weathered, with mildew covering large parts of the plaster, with locals stripping out valuables inside, and farmers using the space as steam into the mountains and the picturesque scenery. The area has a rich history dating back to the early 1800s, and after World War II, the various resorts that began to spring up became known as the honeymoon capital of the world. However, the area began to decline in the 90s and early 2000s, seeing the closure of many famous institutions. Perhaps one of the most iconic out of all of them was the Penn Hills Resort, a hotel with such a vibrant history and one that many people enjoyed over the next couple of years. This grew into a lodging motel with over 100 rooms across 500 acres of land. Though barely any of this land was being utilized, and by the mid-1950s, the hotel appreciated moderate success. However, this wasn't without any roadblocks, as soon after they opened, Francis's brother Charles had passed away. Francis and his son ultimately began to rebuild after a flood had ravaged the lodge, and really at this point, all this property stood as was a measly roadside hotel. This, however, changed as improvements were made to the hotel, including a brand new pool, new lodging structures, and a main event building of sorts that housed common areas, and a beautiful new restaurant overlooking the pond and the nearby Broadhead Creek. Across that creek was now a brand new 9-hole golf course for their guests to enjoy. The hotel snowmobile to get around the resort grounds. Elsewhere on that 500 acres, also owned by the family, was the Penn Hill Estates, luxury vacation home rentals, and Alpine Mountain, where guests could go skiing during the winter months. By the early 90s, Penn Hills Resort had thoroughly enjoyed its success over the last 3 decades. But now, things were about to change.
I just keep getting better.
With the now outdated decor and steadily high prices spelled bad news for the Poconos as tourism sharply declined. Resorts elsewhere in the Poconos had already closed down, some even becoming abandoned. Penn Hills, however, continued on. With less and less occupancy, the high cost to maintain the property began to outweigh the income, and in many instances, the hotel was losing money. By the early 2000s, the
below to start downloading now. 15-acre densely wooded area in Baltimore, Maryland. Since 1946, roughly 80 bodies have been discovered here. Locals refer to Leakin Park as Baltimore's open-air cemetery. In hopes of preventing further illegal activity from occurring inside the park, the more secluded interior roads were barricaded and all the roadsides blocked.